I'm Julie Goldman. I'm a documentary producer, and I'm delighted to be here to have a conversation with Jen McShane, the amazing filmmaker who I greatly admire, from her films Mothers of Bedford, Ernie and Joe, Crisis Cops, and now this beautiful short, The Quilters, which I was delighted to see, and no surprise, just fell in love with. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Julie. Thank you for those beautiful words. I appreciate it. Thank you. Really good to be here.
Oh, yes, I want to hear all about it. So, first thing I was wondering, are you a quilter?
Ah, the most painful, embarrassing question of them all. No. And it leads me to a really funny, I thought, really funny story. I was filming, obviously, inside the sewing room. And, I'd just become part of the fabric, use the bad pun, just hanging out all the time. And something I said made one of the guys look at me and say, "You quilt, right?" And I was like, like looking at my shoes. I said, "I've always wanted to, but I've always found it very intimidating," which led to a great conversation. Like, how could that be intimidating? Like, if you can make a film, you can make, it's so different. And Jimmy launched into this wonderful, kind of very earnest pep talk about it's mainly straight lines and da 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 da. So I did promise them that when I have time, because I actually have always wanted to learn and I admire it, and it's kind of an aspirational thing. So, which was part of the appeal for this story, was that, you know, wow, I love quilts. So yeah, but I don't. Well,
But you will, I have a feeling. You're at least start with a very small one.
exactly. That's what they said.
And actually, I know people up by where you live who are quilters, so I'm going to make a whole connection. But
Oh, good. I love that.
um,
Yeah.
so how did you find this story?
Well, it's interesting. Somebody who you and I both know, who's phenomenal, Toby Shimon, who, yes, I know, love fest. And I've had the great
People would
blessing.
hear Toby's name.
No, it's true. And, it was really a blessing for me to work with her on every project, pretty much. And we just get each other, and it's always just a phenomenal experience. And she knew I was kind of hunting around, and she saw a local news story in Missouri, somehow kind of passed across her path. And she forwarded it to me with kind of a funny tagline, which said, "This made me think of you." And I'm like, huh, I don't quilt that, but obviously, and she was so right, because it just rang a lot of bells for me. And she knows me well enough to think this sounds like something Jen might be interested in. So I went out, I called the prison. Miraculously, they said I could come
I mean,
out.
that first of all, like just to say, it's what is a maximum security five, five,
Yeah,
like
level 5. I know.
five
So yeah,
prison.
yeah, but that's,
That's unheard of
that
or
is, yeah.
rare.
And it is unheard of, I think, in terms of getting a crew in. I know I was the first camera in there. And, but initially I went without anything, just me. And which I think is so important, no matter what the topic, obviously, for trust issues, particularly in this situation with kind of lack of agency for the men. So that was important to build trust, but also just to really observe and not be distracted with the bells and whistles of a crew. So I went out there for several days and just parked myself in the sewing room and just watched. And I was completely enamored. Like, I knew pretty quickly, exact same thing with Ernie and Joe. Within a couple of hours of spending time in their company, I was like, oh my gosh, why the hell didn't I bring my camera? Um, so I sat there, and then it also allowed me to kind of get to know the man who was running it, the corrections person running. So there was a little more comfort, even though I think they weren't quite sure what they were getting into, just because I kept coming back again and again, as any filmmaker knows you have to do. But from their vantage point, they thought, especially when they heard it was probably going to be a short, they're like, "What are you still coming back for?" But it
It's
turned.
always the thing, isn't it? Like, haven't you got enough?
I know, and
They
but
just turn to you like, what is wrong with you?
exactly. And Chill was kind of let out this belly laugh. One day he said, "So how long do you think this will be?" And I knew he thought I was going to say an hour and a half or a series. I said, "No, under 40." And he was like, "Minutes?" And I said, "Yes." And I could tell they were just completely perplexed, which was made showing them the finished product so satisfying, because I was a little as you always are when you're showing it to the subjects. I mean, it's the most important audience, really, honestly. And so when I went, I was thought, what are they gonna? And they completely got it. Like I did give a pretty long preamble as to
Yeah.
why certain things were not in and choices I made and why and the kind of main what I was trying to achieve. And they got it completely and really loved it.
Was
And
it just the subjects who watched it, or was it?
yes, yes. Eventually, it'll be the whole facility. We're going to do it for the whole prison, but initially, I wanted them to kind of see it just as a core group,
Yeah.
and we were supposed to show it in the visiting room, which is a little bit more comfortable and large. There's space, and of course, as always happens, there was a snafu at the last second. The visiting room was being used for a training, even though I had reserved it a month earlier. So they wheeled in this giant television into the sewing room. So the
Oh,
guys watched it in the room where we filmed it. It was
oh, that's
just, it was
beautiful.
all the things. And it was probably the most, I think it is to date, the most moving screening I've ever done. And I've done a lot of great screenings, but something about they were the only audience
Yeah.
and kind of in this space. It was beautiful. And they were clearly moved. And, um, you know, several of them said, we wish we could hug you. And you're not allowed to do that in a max with a visitor. So it was beautiful. They really got it, which was great, really great.
Incredibly gratifying, isn't it?
Unbelievably so. And I think, they were grateful on a lot of levels, but I think this idea that it was I said, listen, I know I can't tell them every bit of the story that I'd like to, but I want the viewer to leave after 30 minutes or so and feel they've been in your company and they understand what's happening in this room and what you're creating. And they said, well, if that, then you did it, which was beautiful for me to hear that from them. And I just, yeah, it was a special time.
You
And
really achieved that. Like you meet them and it's not about the past or the future. It's about the moment with them
right.
that you're capturing. And I love that about the film because that's a very special place to get to.
Yeah, and I think they really liked that idea of, I think what they're trying to do in their daily lives is reframe their existence, who they are, how they're seen, what their legacy might be. And so the film, by meeting them as quilters, um, it allows us to do that. And this room really felt like a beehive from the moment I sat in it. They're all insanely busy, and everyone collectively is also busy, and they're helping each other and nod. And there's just this giant unspoken goal. And it was a beautiful place to spend time, which was so strange given the larger picture. But
Yeah.
they have really created it. Like, and I hope people can sense that this is, Chill has a great line where he says, a lot of these other guys in general population don't get it. We grab this. And he kind of actually pulls his hand up. And this idea that creating community when it really on the face of it shouldn't succeed, and it does. So it's great.
It's absolutely, it really comes across beautifully. It's interesting because so you spent a lot of time at Bedford Correctional.
Yeah.
I mean, were you, which women's prison? I mean, were you trepidatious going into a men's prison initially before you?
A little, to be honest, like I was so enthused and excited about the room, that I didn't think too much about it. But then once I actually started production, I thought, oh wow, we really are in a different space. And I could tell from the guys, they were saying, this is this is a very tough place to manage, either living there or as in the administration. It's tough, and the screening to get in felt different.
Yeah,
Um, uh, Interestingly enough, though, I felt a little freer. I don't know why that is. Maybe because the quilting room, the fact that it is such a positive endorsement of kind of humanity in that space. There was just a little more sense that, okay, yes, you can go to the cell. Yes, you could, in where Bedford, strangely enough, even though it was kids and lovey-dovey, they were really always on me. Like creatively, there's always somebody on my shoulder. So from a creative standpoint, it was a little different. But I was a little, to be honest, there were a couple times when we were moving around, but most of the time it was fine. But occasionally I had a little second thought. But once we were in it, then it was fine. Like once we were kind of accepted, it was fine. And these guys just took this project on as kind of one of their other quilts. Like they were really, yeah, it was a lovely experience, weirdly.
Was it a small crew?
Very, which is always my MO, if at all. I always only want three because I feel like otherwise you become part of the problems,
Right.
especially in a prison. Especially in a prison, I just feel like there's not a lot of space anywhere in a prison, but especially in that sewing room where you can see there, they've stacked there's no there's no space anywhere. So I just didn't want us to become kind of too obvious. And that proved to be a good thing. So it's me, and then the phenomenal DP Scott Ruderman did a great job, and
Yeah.
sound recordist Paul Toohey did a great job, and his role was really key because to capture that intimacy, that beehive thing that I was hoping to, you need that. Like if you're, any quilting group would say this, or a knitting circle, there's the kind of the banter and the comments, and there's this like, pass me the scissors, or you got to iron, I'll iron it for you. So we needed all that, even though I only had one camera. So we had about 7 lavs going all the time. So those tracks were initially a nightmare, but so helpful later because at one point,
It becomes the buzz of the beehive that you
exactly,
wonder.
exactly. And
Yeah.
and the hum of the machines, and at one point Fred makes an error that he's furious about, and you can just hear Ricky off camera saying, "Oh, he gets stressed out sometimes." Or, this just like the peanut gallery commenting on all their things, it was good. So, but
Do you ever like have you shown the film to Ernie and Joe?
uh, Ernie just saw it and was, as Ernie would say, like was moved to tears. He loved it, and his wife quilts. And Joe is going to see it, hasn't yet. But I know it's wild. It's like I just feel like
Justice crossover.
no, it's true. It's totally true. In fact, somebody was saying it's kind of like a trilogy, Mothers of Bedford, Little Present.
Yeah.
And so clearly I'm drawn to certain topics, I guess. But yeah, they were very, Ernie and his wife really loved it, which was great. And it was interesting too, as a short, so different than the experience they had, where I really didn't cut, like I kept coming back,
So you went in saying this is a short.
pretty quickly. Once I was there for at least a day or two, after the first day or two, I thought, and getting back to the exact point you made about meeting them there, I thought I really initially knew I don't want to go into the crime. I don't want to go. I just feel like that's not what this film is. There's plenty of excellent films. And Mothers of Bedford, we talked about it, and I thought it was important, but not for this. This is about how you're using your time and how art can kind of, none of these guys would have ever thought of themselves as artists in any way, or crafters in any way. So this kind of self-discovery
Yeah.
at a different point in your life, most of them are older, in the kind of setting that would not encourage it. That's what I was interested in. And I thought it would be such a distraction, to go into the crimes,
It
and
takes you,
kind of,
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we did a film called Solitary with Christy Jacobson some years ago, and there was a big discussion, decision, like their crimes came much later in the film
yeah,
because you couldn't meet them and know them and have any kind of connection with them. It would
right,
all be about the crime and
exactly.
not about the person that you're meeting. It's an interesting thing to
No,
experience.
it's so true. And I had this discussion with Toby a lot. Should we, because there was a concern the audience would be very curious. And so we thought about maybe like headlines or making the sentence more explicit. But we thought you can't help it. You just start thinking, you start connecting those dots. And I thought, so, and interestingly enough, I've not gotten one question from an audience member. So, and I figure if you really want
Great
to know,
sign.
you can get online. But that was really an interesting aha for me. Like they are curious, but not that curious. They'd rather kind of be in that moment. And so, yeah, I'm really glad we ended up with that choice. And that kind of helped solidify my idea that it was a short because,
Yeah.
to get into the crime and the backstory, we'd have to spend a lot of time to do it with any kind of sensitivity. And but I don't know. There's a moment where we see still photographs of their childhood, because, and I love that. I love that because I didn't want to kind of ignore the fact that they were somebody else once and they had this childhood and this idea of potential and what might have been. But how do you do that without the typical voiceover? When
No,
I
it was like a
oh,
beautiful shorthand to get to that in a really
exactly.
way.
So, and that was just a great, Toby and Will, the co-editors on this, did a beautiful job because, if you do that voiceover, then how do you stop it? Like if they start telling you about your childhood, then you want to know how they ended up here. So I think it was Toby who said, why don't we try no voiceover and just see what happens? And then your mind connects it. Oh my gosh, there he is with his birthday cake, Zorro birthday cake. And then you just see, and you kind of make that connection in your mind. And because we don't really need to know exactly why it happened, you just know there was this and now
Yeah.
it's this. Yeah. So
Yeah, it's interesting because audiences are, I think, really sophisticated in that way because of consuming so much that there is the ability to make these connections without being told.
yeah, without spoon feeding. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what now you showed it to the subjects and
Yeah.
then what is happening with the film now? I mean, other than the fact that it's shortlisted and
Yeah. No, we're having discussions. It looks like it'll have a home, which is fantastic. So very, very happy because, shorts are, my goodness, shorts are hard. There's this kind of naivete, for someone who only did features before, initially, oh my gosh, it'll be quicker, easier to fund, what the heck? And luckily, several people were like, slow down, and it was quite a challenge, mainly because you're distilling everything. Like, does it really move it forward? So it's a constant like slashing, which is so painful.
yeah,
So it does look like it's going to have a home. I'm not exactly, I don't know the details yet, but it looks like we will probably, looks like there's interest. I'll put it that way. And I've really a bit of an outreach geek. I
that's
love
what I was just about to ask you. Like, so what is that part of the
that. I'm all guns blazing for, which is a bad phrase. But we're doing a pilot study in a men's max in Connecticut here, Cheshire, using the film as a kind of jumping off discussion point. I was at the San Quentin Film Festival, which was phenomenal, especially for someone who's interested in those kind of stories. It was amazing. It was really an incredible experience. And several of the guys came up to me and said they would love a kind of a program like this, even though San Quentin has tons of programs. They said we'd love to do it, and there are about five younger men standing next to me, and one of them is kind of egging on a younger guy and says, "Tell her, tell her, tell her." And he's looking a little. I said, "You can tell me what, And he goes, "Well, I crochet." So this idea too of like, what it means to be in a men's prison, like what it means to be a man. I think the film speaks a little bit to this toxic masculinity issue we
absolutely. Yeah.
talk about all the time, and choosing to take a different path and what that can mean, in terms of your mental health too. I think for any guy who does this kind of tactile creative work, it's just a huge way to kind of make peace with where you are. I mean, again, Chill says something in the film where he's like pointing to the quilt he's working on. He says, when I'm doing this, I'm not here. I'm not in here.
Yeah.
I think
Love
there's
that.
a lot of, which, yeah.
And also, I mean, just it seems like being able to work with like foster care programs to be able to make that connection is so beautiful. That can be replicated in such an interesting way.
Definitely. And I think that is one of my goals, is to, San Quentin is going to show it on their in our TV channel. And I know I'm confident it's going to have a good reach inside, because that's very important to me, that the population that is in the film is seen by the population that it mirrors. But I do think I think there's demand for this, because I remember I said to the guys when I did that screening, I said, how would you like me to use this film?
Oh,
And one of them kind of very pointedly was like pointing at the screen and said, if I was somewhere that didn't have this, had nothing like this, and he's pointing to he said, I'd want that. I'd want that feeling. So I do think it could be replicated. And there are so many people in prison who were in foster state care. I mean, the numbers are astounding. So that part is part of what really spoke to me with the topic too. This kind of unspoken bridging of kind of a healing of a past you don't quite remember. And the guys they've done a lot of quilts for tons of nonprofits and veterans and any kind of charity. But there's something about the foster care thing is really, they have just taken it to a different level. The passion there is palpable. And I think it's for that, this idea that they're helping someone. Jimmy says it, they've been told they don't matter, we're saying, and this idea like they're forgotten, these kids are forgotten. It's just, so I really wanted that to kind of be sprinkled out without kind of hitting you over the head with it. And we, originally, sorry.
Well done. 'Cause you
Oh,
did.
thanks. We originally had a standalone scene where the quilts are being delivered by Joe, the man who runs the program inside at the time. He's now moved, but and he drives it to social services. Anyway, we had a whole scene. We go into the homes with the kids. And when we were doing rough cut screenings, it weirdly, we got a great comment, a note from somebody who said, I don't really, it sounds going to sound strange, but I don't really want to leave the men. Like they don't get to deliver it. So I feel strange. And I thought, you know what, that's true. Because it never quite felt right, but we kind of felt we should have it there. So we pulled it out completely, left that beehive feeling intact. And then by putting it in the end credits, you kind of get that.
You get the closure, but you don't have to feel like you've left. You're already out watching.
Exactly. You're already out. And then you get that kind of aha moment. But I didn't quite appreciate how moving it would be for the men.
That's what I was just wondering. Yeah.
Oh, wow. They were most of them pulled me aside after and said, oh my gosh, that was amazing. I think I could have just kept showing the credits over and over just for them to see that, because they never see their quilts outside.
So nobody ever sends them back a photo or anything.
Occasionally, we actually see one of them in the film, and they do get some thank you notes. But this idea of that, the kid jumping on the bed with the butterfly quilt, I think they were absolutely mesmerized at that part of it. And I was so happy that they, because I said to them, it's like you're building this imaginary bridge out to the community. You're seen differently, you see them differently, but you don't see it in real time. So that was great. It was really great.
Yeah, there's something about that that's just like, I thought that when I saw the credits, I thought, oh gosh, I hope they see this,
Yeah, they really did. They really did. And now hopefully a lot of men will see it and, maybe just be able to see themselves a little differently. I mean, Ricky talks about forgiveness and, this idea that forgiving yourself and trying to find a way to find purpose. And I think everybody needs it. I learned that with Mother's
something positive,
exactly.
make something positive out of all of your living. Yeah.
And especially, I think if you're doing life, I was quite impressed that they can get out of bed and, make that a valuable experience for themselves and for people around them. And by then bringing other younger men into the program, which Ricky does very intentionally and teaches people who don't know how to sew. And so it's kind of growing and feeding on itself and thriving, which is,
creating a different kind of like a positive mentorship in that situation.
Exactly. Because, I remember Mona in Mothers of Bedford saying, even if I never get out of here, I need a purpose. I need a point, and we all do. So anyway.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has been wonderful to speak to you. I really love the film. I hope everybody sees it, and I hope you can get it far and wide and making a difference and replicating this program, which is quite extraordinary. Congratulations, Jen.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks so much for your time. And it was a lovely conversation. Great.